Self-defense gurus are full of all kinds of wisdom. They'll say things like, the best self-defense is to just run away. We can't spar here because our techniques are too dangerous. And of course, my favorite, self-defense is not about fighting. What they're really saying when they spew this nonsense is, I have no idea what I'm talking about because I've never actually been in a fight before. Because the simple truth is, self-defense is about fighting. And if you don't understand that, you might get yourself killed. Now, that might sound a little clickbaity, and it is, but it is not inaccurate, because there's countless videos on YouTube of self-defense based martial artists getting absolutely destroyed in real combat. In the most tame version of this, we're talking about guys like DKU and various other Tai Chi masters who look like a joke once the bell actually rings. In the most dangerous version of this, we're talking about actual real people getting beat up, stabbed, and shot in situations that were easily avoidable, if not handleable, if they had been trained in realistic hand-to-hand combat. Because there's a difference between saying self-defense is not about fighting and self-defense is about more than fighting. In the first case, you're saying, my job is just to avoid fighting at all costs, so I don't really need to learn how to. In the second case, you're saying fighting is one of the skills I have to develop if I want to better protect myself. Because self-defense is about more than just violence. Knowing first aid, emergency preparedness, knowing how to communicate clearly and effectively. These are all skills you need to develop if you want to keep yourself safe. So self-defense is a holistic term. It can apply to a lot of things at the same time. But now, that introduces a new problem. Because those same Super Grandmaster senseis will eventually concede and say, okay, yeah, self-defense is about fighting, but it's actually about using dirty poison hand techniques to fight 2, 3, even 12 men all at the same time. And you're fighting them on the streets, not bound by the rules of the ring. Which means they're going to start showing you some absolutely ridiculous techniques based on nothing but fantasy that don't hold up to even the slightest bit of scrutiny. Now, in a previous video, I said the only 3 elements of hand-to-hand combat are striking, clinching, and grappling. And we should only practice the martial arts that most effectively utilize those 3 elements. And without sugarcoating it, I'm talking about stuff like boxing, Muay Thai, wrestling, Jiu-Jitsu, and Judo. And of course we can lump in MMA as well, since by necessity, it lumps in the best elements of all those aforementioned styles. But that's pretty much it. Now, inevitably, someone's gonna chime in with, what about Sanda? What about Kudo? What about this, that, or the other thing? Shut up. At best, we're talking about a slightly different version of one of the martial arts I mentioned before, and at worst, you're just delusional. Shut up. But back to the point. What is it that makes these martial arts so effective at teaching practical fighting ability? Why is boxing better than Krav Maga? Why is Jiu-Jitsu training a better option than Kung Fu? The answer should be pretty obvious. All of these martial arts are sports-based martial arts. And in a sport, winning and losing are clearly defined. Can you tell me, what is winning in self-defense? Is it just not getting killed? Well, in that case, I'm not getting killed right now, so I must be an expert. And while I could argue that, today that's not what I'm talking about. And by that same logic, if the absence of failure is your only criteria for success, then by definition, I'm an undefeated MMA champion. Yes, I've never actually won an MMA fight, but I've also never lost one. Every fight is a simulation. Every drill, every round, every technique is just a simulation of what could happen in a real fight. Even MMA is a simulation. Now, I'm not saying that in a the Matrix has you kind of way. I mean that literally. Because you know what happens when you put someone in a rear naked choke and you don't let go? They die. Same goes for knockout strikes, bone breaks, joint locks, throws, whatever. Every single way of winning in the cage can mean crippling or worse on the streets. Which means if you know how to fight in the cage, you know how to fight on the streets. Think about it like buying an SUV. One person might need that much car to pack up his kids to take them to soccer practice and then to theater camp. But another person might need that car so they can pack up all their gear to travel on hiking trips around the country. It's always going to be the same car, but its use is going to be very different. By the same token, you might have one person taking a jiu-jitsu class to want to learn to compete, and another person is just trying to learn how to protect themselves. Ideally, they're both getting exactly what they want, but they want very different things. Now, here's where things get interesting, because now we have two different people with two different goals who have to end up in the exact same place. Fortunately, a system like Jiu-Jitsu offers an objective way for either person to judge how good they're getting at a given moment. So ultimately, it doesn't matter if you're training for self-defense or for sport, because if you can't tap anybody when you're rolling, you're not going to be good at either. But this video isn't about how martial arts training is good for everybody. I'm talking specifically to the person who wants to learn to defend themselves. And if that's you, there are a couple things you need to keep in mind, even if you're training in a combat sport. First, and most importantly, remember that while self-defense fighting and sport fighting are very similar, it is not a one-for-one exchange. So while most of your training should be done in a combat sports paradigm, it can every once in a while be beneficial to break out the shock knives, do some 2-on-1 sparring, practice out in a parking lot, whatever. You don't have to spend the majority of your time doing this, but sprinkling in some chaotic variety to standard MMA training can help bridge the gap between self-defense and sport fighting. And by the way, I have a lot more to say on this subject in particular, but we'll get to that in a minute. Second thing to keep in mind, and this is kind of along the same idea, remember that not every tactic works in self-defense the way it does in sport. In a boxing fight, it's okay to be extremely defensive and then win the match based on points. But in self-defense, it's probably more advisable to rip a solid punch to the solar plexus so your opponent collapses gasping for air as soon as possible. In a pure jiu-jitsu match, it's acceptable to throw yourself to the ground and then butt scoot over to your opponent and invite him to come down with you. In a self-defense context, it's probably better to close distance with a stomp kick and then find the guillotine choke and put your opponent to sleep. By the way, I don't know any jiu-jitsu players who think pulling guard in the street is a good idea, but Kempo dorks think that's all jiu-jitsu is, so I had to talk about it. Third, for the love of God, lift some weights and sprint a few times per week. There is never going to be a situation where being strong and fast is not a benefit. Despite what your BJJ coach may have told you, sometimes all you need to do is be stronger than your opponent. If you just look like an athlete, you're already less likely to be victimized. Now, as a martial artist, you don't want to only always rely on your strength and speed, but you also don't want to not have them available to you at all. If you do nothing else, do some heavy deadlifts, do a bunch of push-ups, work the heavy bag, do some sprints. That will take you way farther in self-defense than something like Bagua ever could. Before I go any further, I want to give a shout out to Henry Zhang of the Dragon Combat Club. The Dragon Combat Club is a free martial arts community based out of New York City, offering self-defense training for the Asian Pacific Islander community and anybody looking to protect themselves. I think Henry and the Dragon Combat Club are doing great things for their community, particularly at a time when, unfortunately, violent hate crimes are on the rise. But free training doesn't come cheap. So if you'd like to help support our cause and expand martial art training to as many people as possible, consider making a donation to the Dragon Combat Club. Information is down in the description. Remember, violent problems require violent solutions. Now let's get back to the video. Earlier, I talked about how sport fighting isn't perfect. The more rules and caveats you put in your martial arts training, the less useful it actually is for self-defense. To really be a holistic self-defense system, we have to do some realistic pressure testing. And this can range from sparring in a parking lot, or in your car, or drilling with a shock knife. There's a lot of options. These are all really great tools to enhance your self-defense training, but they also come with some major drawbacks. Because the reason MMA is practiced in a padded room with padded gloves on is to make sure that no one gets so hurt in the training that they can't come back the next day. But if you're rolling around on the gravel grappling over a rubber knife, it's only a matter of time till you or your partner take the tip to the eye. We can mitigate that problem by incorporating more safety precautions, but again, the more we do that, the less realistic the training actually is. So this kind of training is useful, no doubt, but everything in moderation and done responsibly. Let's talk now about women's self-defense. Women's self-defense is a term I'm giving to the just do this videos you see all over TikTok and Instagram these days. These videos are well-intentioned enough, I guess, but miss the most important element of martial arts training: violence. Whether you like it or not, violence is at the heart of all martial arts training. Your relationship and ability to inflict violence on another person dictates how successful you're going to be in a violent encounter. So when I see these women's self-defense tutorials where they're teaching 3 easy joint locks to escape any situation and the attacker just walks up and stands there, My first reaction is to laugh, but my second reaction is one of concern. I put a lot more faith into the woman who knows how to flip the switch and go berserker mode than I do in the person who's been practicing self-defense techniques against no real kind of pressure testing, beyond maybe sometimes saying, grab me a little harder this time. The truth is, as far as self-defense is concerned, martial arts ability is kind of second to direct, unstoppable aggression. But that's a video for a different day. All that being said, the best advice is still to just run away, right? Yes, in certain scenarios where you can, absolutely. If you're at the bar and you've been running your mouth, and a few guys decide it's time to shut you up, yeah, run away from that fight because you don't need to have it. But if you're in a situation where a man gets onto your subway car and starts swinging at you because you're the wrong skin color, that's not something you can walk away from, and it's something you need to know how to handle. But even just on a practical level, do you actually know how to just run away? Are you actually capable of running away? Because I train with people every single day who can beat the brakes off of me 12 ways to Sunday, but can't sprint for more than 10 seconds without hurting themselves. And if you think 10 seconds is all you need to get the job done, tell your wife I'm sorry. Bottom line, self-defense is about fighting. You should absolutely try to avoid it if at all possible, but if it comes down to it, you better know how to throw down before you go down. But anyway, you guys, I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope you learned something. If you did, please make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you want to support the channel, consider becoming a Patreon or YouTube member. Memberships start as low as $1 per month and can really help the channel grow. And if you're looking to see more great content from me, why don't you check out these videos right here. As always, you guys, it's been Rob from Combat Self-Defense. I want to thank you for all the hard work. Thank you for the hard work yet to be done. And I'll see you next time.